Montagu Collet Norman, 1st Baron Norman, Governor of the Bank of England from 1920 to 1944, was a highly influential figure in global finance, and his policies extended beyond national boundaries to exert imperial-like control over other nations, particularly through the banking system. His tenure overlapped with a crucial period of European history, including the aftermath of World War I, the Great Depression, and the rise of Nazi Germany. Norman's approach to central banking often emphasized the power of financial control as a subtle yet potent form of imperialism, which had severe consequences for nations like Germany. Paradoxically, despite these impacts, Norman maintained connections with the Nazi regime, a relationship that raises important questions about his motivations and beliefs. Norman's use of the banking system as a form of imperialism is most clearly seen in the way Britain, under his leadership, exerted financial control over war-torn economies, including that of Germany. After World War I, the Treaty of Versailles imposed severe reparations on Germany, which crippled its economy and created widespread resentment. Norman, as Governor of the Bank of England, played a significant role in the post-war financial system that enforced these reparations. The global financial architecture of the time, particularly the gold standard, was designed to stabilize currencies but also to maintain the dominance of British and, to a lesser extent, American financial institutions. Germany was particularly hard hit by the conditions imposed by the reparations and the return to the gold standard. The Dawes Plan of 1924 and the Young Plan of 1929 were international agreements aimed at restructuring Germany's reparations payments, but these plans did little to alleviate the long-term economic suffering in the country. Norman's Bank of England, along with other central banks, acted as enforcers of these agreements, ensuring that Germany remained financially subordinate to the victors of World War I, especially Britain. By enforcing these reparations and debt obligations, Norman effectively used the financial system as a tool of imperialism, without the need for direct political control or military intervention. Germany's hyperinflation in the early 1920s and the subsequent economic depression can be directly linked to the burden of reparations, which were in part facilitated and sustained by British financial dominance. In this sense, the banking system, under Norman's direction, became a mechanism through which Britain could exert continued control over Germany, even after the latter's military defeat. Despite the suffering his policies contributed to in Germany, Norman is known to have had personal and professional ties with the Nazi regime. After Adolf Hitler came to power in 1933, Norman's relationship with Hjalmar Schacht, the president of the Reichsbank, became particularly notable. Schacht, a key economic figure in Nazi Germany, had a long-standing professional relationship with Norman, and the two shared views on monetary policy and central banking. While Schacht was not a full-fledged Nazi ideologue, he played a critical role in stabilizing Germany's economy in the early years of Hitler's reign and facilitating the rearmament of the country. Norman's interactions with the Nazis raised suspicions about his sympathies toward their regime, despite the fact that his earlier policies had contributed to Germany's economic devastation. It is possible that Norman, who was deeply opposed to communism and sympathetic to authoritarian governance in the context of economic stability, saw the Nazis as a bulwark against Bolshevism and revolutionary socialism, which he feared would threaten the global financial order. This fear of communist revolution, which was widespread among Western elites in the interwar period, may have driven Norman to maintain connections with the Nazis, who presented themselves as anti-communist defenders of order. Norman's behavior during this period has been criticized for enabling the Nazi regime, especially through his indirect assistance in German rearmament. One controversial episode involved the transfer of Czech gold reserves to the Nazis after Germany's annexation of Czechoslovakia in 1939. As a trustee of the Bank for International Settlements, Norman was implicated in the decision to release these gold reserves to Germany, further fueling the Nazi war machine. While his direct involvement remains debated, his role in facilitating this transfer suggests a troubling willingness to cooperate with the Nazis, even as Europe moved toward war. Blame shifting and the Nazi narrative on British imperialism. What makes Norman's relationship with the Nazis particularly complex is the ideological terrain of blame shifting that characterized the Nazi regime's rise to power. While Nazi propaganda famously fixated on anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, blaming Jews for Germany's economic and political woes, there were also factions within National Socialism and within broader socialist movements that directed their ire at British imperialism. Some Nazis and socialists argued that Britain, through its control of the global financial system, was the true source of Germany's economic hardship rather than an international Jewish conspiracy. It is plausible that Norman's close ties with the Nazi regime were influenced by this narrative. Having overseen policies that contributed to Germany's economic collapse, Norman may have found a convenient ideological scapegoat in the anti-British, anti-imperialist rhetoric of certain Nazi and socialist circles. By shifting the blame for Germany's problems onto British imperialism, these groups allowed figures like Norman to deflect responsibility for the consequences of their financial policies. In this sense, Norman's alignment with the Nazi regime might have been driven not only by his anti-communist leanings, but also by a desire to avoid facing the full implications of the financial imperialism he had helped to implement. Conclusion. Norman's role in Germany's tragedy. Montagu Collet. Norman's tenure as governor of the Bank of England left a profound mark on Germany's interwar economy, shaping its financial woes through a system of banking imperialism that reinforced British dominance. His role in enforcing reparations and the gold standard contributed to the economic conditions that fueled political instability and ultimately enabled the rise of the Nazi regime. Paradoxically, Norman maintained professional ties with the Nazis, even as his earlier policies had contributed to the very problems the Nazis exploited in their rise to power. The question of whether Norman sided with the Nazis to shift blame for his own policies remains speculative but plausible. Faced with the failures of the banking system he championed, it is possible that Norman found ideological cover in the Nazi and socialist critiques of British imperialism. In doing so, he may have absolved himself of responsibility, allowing him to maintain his position of influence even as the consequences of his policies ravaged Europe. Ultimately, Norman's career offers a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked financial power and the ways in which banking systems can be weaponized to maintain imperial dominance. His legacy is a complicated one, marked by both the stabilizing influence he exerted on global finance and the suffering his policies helped perpetuate in countries like Germany.